can you do about that with this particular system in place? Now, we don't have universal standards that we can say, and also that they are not set by an independent body of qualified experts. I would love to see, for instance, the AAAS, or the National Academy of Sciences, the big scientific bodies in the United States, being given jurisdiction over state science standards. Being able to say, here's the accepted body of knowledge in chemistry, physics, and biology. Here's what ought to be taught. And with the input of educators, of course, appropriately assign that to the right grade levels. So we've got this intense politicization. The other thing is, as Paul mentioned, that one of the things we want students to be is creative thinkers. That we don't want them to be simple rote memorization machines. This is a huge problem in the last few years in the United States. Some of you may have heard of a major teaching act that was passed in the United States some years ago called No Child Left Behind, which sounds extremely virtuous. Right? We're going to make sure every kid knows the appropriate stuff in order to graduate. And what it has become is a policy of generating some standard test items, a great many standard test items, and teaching children to the test. That what it has done is turn many of our schools into organizations that are, again, enforcing rote memorization. Instead of creative thinking, you've got students who are now sitting down and learning a set of facts that they know will be required and regurgitated on a final exam in their schools. And there's a great deal of financial pressure on us because our schools are actually judged by how many of the students can pass on these sets of questions. And funding levels depend on this. We have got this very curious situation where if you've got a school that is doing poorly in meeting the No Child Left Behind requirements, that means they get less money. Instead of, you would think, more money, because they're the ones that desperately need it to correct the problems in there. So this is not a big. What we need is we need an increased policy of teaching students how to learn, not teaching students how to know something, which isn't very useful in the long run. And I'll just mention at the last here, this is a value that people like me, atheists, and I'm sure there are some of you here who are atheists, this is a value that's perfectly concordant with our values. That what we want is a collection of students who come out of the school not necessarily indoctrinated into atheism. I shouldn't say not necessarily. We don't want them indoctrinated into atheism. What we want is a body of students who are confident to learn on their own, who can apply their own critical thinking skills. Because we're pretty damn confident that we're right? And that's how they will arrive at the right answer, is that they know how to learn. So let me stop there.
Yeah, I just kind of heard recently that the Texas governor has appointed a creationist as the...
Oh yes, that's a beautiful example of the problem of politicizing the educational process. And it's particularly horrific because it is Texas. Texas is the biggest school book market in the United States. It's not quite as big as California, but California doesn't have this whole state process to approve textbooks. It's more broken up. So that means that Texas dominates the textbook market, and anything that Texas decides is what the publishers will jump on. Texas is also a crazy place with a great many right-wing fundamentalist religious people there. And yes, you're exactly right. The governor appoints the head of the school board, the state school board, and for a while it was John McLeroy, who is a creationist dentist who believes the earth is 6,000 years old. So he was put in charge of deciding what kids will learn in the science classroom. He was recently deposed. The other members of the school board managed to get a vote of no confidence and kick him out of that position, although he's still on the board, and he was replaced by another conservative who's just as crazy. So these are the people who are now deciding what should be taught in schools, and they are also deciding what textbooks ought to be used.
And when they decide what textbooks are used, they decide them for the entire country. So, this is a good example of how not to do it. We need a mechanism to have qualified people set science standards, and we'd also like some way that we could break up Texas a little bit, so it isn't in charge of everything. We'd be much happier if California were setting school book standards.
You see, why do you think creationism is so strong in America? Compared to Europe, it just seems bizarre, that you have such a large number of people believing in a 6,000-year-old world and, instant creations.
Give them time, they'll be here, they're growing here. Well, there's a lot of factors that fit into this. One is I think something we've mentioned that Paul Rose also mentioned, that you want to bring up students who are critical thinkers who know how to learn, and creationism relies on authority. They're not very imaginative. One talk I give, I actually list a whole bunch of things that they plagiarize, that they steal, and they recycle over and over again. That there is no creativity at all in these people, that they really rely on the authority of prior pundits. Okay, so that's one thing. Is by weakening critical thinking, you open the door to authoritarian learning, and it's not good. The other is we have this huge diversity of religions in the United States. They're all over the place, and I make the argument that it's an example of evidence for evolution because it's been a Darwinian selection for religion. There are religions that are extremely popular and they do very, very well. No matter how irrational they are, often if they just say what people want to hear, they do very, very well. So that means that those have flourished. There's also a peculiar interpretations of our separation of church and state, where people argue that this is something that means, because it's in our Constitution, it means that religion is really important, and that religion must be valued everywhere. And not religion, atheism, etc., is not valued. So there are many people who endorse the idea of incorporating more religious principles in school. And again, it's because I think they mistake religious principles for moral ones. So moral instruction, independent of a church, is also a good thing to have in your community.
Hi, you were talking about the fact that you don't have national standards in the US, but you do have tests for rote learning for No Child Left Behind. It seems an odd paradox, because most places you look in the world where you get national standards, national curriculum, that then follows the regimen of testing to prove that you've met those standards.
Yes.
So it seems that you have the worst of both worlds.
I won't disagree with you.
Is there a way that you can see to try and divorce that, so that if you do get your national standards in the US, you don't then get another barrage of tests to be met? The old system, the existing system, has always been these state standards, which have been fairly general. They do not tell the teacher how to teach something. They just list the primary ideas that are important in the field, and in an order that's appropriate for the child as they're growing smarter and older and all this kind of stuff. So what you need is a set of national standards that are decided by qualified individuals and not creationist dentists. And those are in place as guidelines. And then get rid of the whole No Child Left Behind, pinning school performance on performance on these standardized tests. And I should mention another personal experience. One of the other standards that they use for performance in No Child Left Behind is the graduation rate. So all of these schools have this magic number they're trying to reach, which is 100% graduation rate. And guess how they achieve it? It's not by better teaching. It's by letting anybody graduate. So getting rid of those kinds of arbitrary rules that will be gamed by the system, I think is critical.